A couple days ago, I did something that a lot of people, myself included to an extent, would probably consider one of the stupidest things you can do. I quit a well-paying job that had tons of opportunity for growth and job security, and I didn't have a backup. If you've ever been in this situation, then you know it's only putting it mildly to say it's an anxiety-inducing position to be in. But there I was, lying in my bed, 1 a.m. turning to 2 a.m., which as you probably know has a way of turning to 3 and 4 and eventually into the sun coming up. The whole time I was thinking, damn, what am I going to do? What should I do? About 6 years ago, I was just starting out on the whole career thing. Being a man in my early 20s, it was time for me to make an important decision in my life. Would I impress women at parties with fun facts about ancient Rome or World War II? Being of Italian-American descent, I picked the one where Italians were the good guys and started listening to Mike Duncan's excellent History of Rome podcast. I finished it, and then went straight to the bookstore near my office and picked up as many books on ancient philosophy as my fresh-out-of-college salary would allow. One of these was a beautiful copy of On the Shortness of Life by Seneca. If you haven't read it, do. It's short, free online, and it was the first truly ancient book I'd read that convinced me that, you know what? Those guys weren't so different from us. They worry about the same stuff I do. Here was a guy who lived 2,000 years ago talking about something that we rarely see in any of the movies that deal with life in the Roman Empire, or the past in general. That is, people had jobs, and just like today, those jobs took up a great deal of their attention, and most importantly, their time. There's been a lot of discussion online in the past few years about our relationship with work and what it ought to be. The pandemic showed us the same amount of work could get done from home as from the office. Although this is starting to get rolled back as workers are called back in, it was a huge success for middle-class workers, who now had more time to take care of things around the house. The locus of much of this conversation, as well as an unfortunate source of derision for its proponents, is r/AntiWork. I'll get back to that. Let's start at the beginning, though. Like I mentioned earlier, Seneca was a Stoic philosopher and statesman who lived around 2,000 years ago in the heart of the Roman Empire. Today, the public perception of Stoic philosophy seems sadly to be reduced to a few quotes on how to live your life by Seneca, Epictetus, and Marcus Aurelius. That wasn't always the case. When Stoicism was really popping off in Athens around 300 BC, it was a much more robust philosophical system of thought, containing ideas about physics, ethics, and logic. Aetius, who lived closer to the time of Seneca than to the founding of Stoicism, sums up those branches as such. Whenever we investigate the cosmos and the things that it contains, it is physics. When we are busily concerned about human life, it is ethics. When about reason, it is logic, or as it is also called, dialectic. Since we are talking about what it is we ought to be doing with our time and our lives, that means that, in the Stoic sense, we are having a conversation about ethics. To the Stoics, living an ethical life meant living according to nature, as it was observed that even plants and animals act in accordance with what is best for them. They were divided on whether one should live according to their own nature, a universal nature, or both, but regardless, a good life was one which someone lived according to their experience and perceptions of what is natural. And to any of you soy boys hearing this who are thinking something like, that's an appeal to nature fallacy, their conclusions are false because the premises upon which they are founded are fallacious. I have only one thing to say to you. Yes, but give them a break. Even if they may have a logical issue in their first principles, it doesn't mean their ethical conclusions are wrong. After all, they're just subjective. Anyway, in a practical sense, to be a good Stoic meant to live according to nature, and that meant obeying the law, performing your duties, and not letting the circumstances of your life dictate your emotional reactions or natural balance. Call it ataraxia, a tranquil mind, or apatheia, an unbothered mind. Either way, the result would be a person who does what they are supposed to and remains calm, inside and out. Just a note on historical context, the Romans were happy to incorporate many Greek traditions, including philosophy, but there was a certain apprehension of embracing anything that wasn't truly Roman. While wealthy Romans were happy to employ Greek scholars as tutors to educate their sons, they were a bit skeptical about some of their practices. Seneca has a particular and peculiar grievance with the Greek interest in trivia surrounding history. He thinks it's a waste of time deliberating about how many rowers were on the ships in the Trojan War, for example. However, he does indulge some historical interest, so long as it provokes virtuous inclinations in a person, such as conquest and service to the state. Anyway, While he is identified as a Stoic philosopher, I wanted to note that Seneca lived centuries after the original Stoics, and was interpreting the philosophy in a way that was compatible with his worldview. That being the worldview of a first century, wealthy Roman living in the center of the empire. Okay, moving on. On the Shortness of Life, or natively, De Brevitate Vitae, is an essay written in the form of a letter to Pompeius Paulinus, who I'm going to call Paulinus because I'm an American. He was probably Seneca's father-in-law. Whether this was, like many philosophical texts, an essay framed as a dialogue or a letter for entertainment or rhetorical purposes, I'm not sure, but for the purposes of this essay, I'm going to take it at face value. Seneca is addressing a man at the end of his career who has served as a high-level bureaucrat for some time. Seneca notes a distressing pattern of action. People are wasting their time on pursuits that distract them from their own personal, internal lives. Whether it be in time spent listening to those in their patronage, arguing with their wives, defending a client, endorsing a candidate, or more common interests like getting drunk or hanging out with prostitutes, Seneca sees time spent on those pursuits as wasted, almost from a utilitarian perspective. We have limited stores of time at our disposal. The storeroom can never be refilled. Contrasting people's behavior with their time against their behavior with their money, he says, "No one is to be found who is willing to distribute his money. Yet among how many does each one of us distribute his life? In guarding their fortune, men are often close-fisted, yet when it comes to the matter of wasting time, in the case of the one thing in which it is right to be miserly, they show themselves most prodigal." Seneca argues against giving so much time to the people, situations, and obligations that vex us. He wants the reader to realize they could be hit by a proverbial bus tomorrow, and they shouldn't wait to start living the life they want to live, nor should they allow others to unnecessarily seize their time from them. Seneca's solution is to turn away from public life as much as possible to embrace leisure. Not leisure for leisure's sake, mind you. No, Seneca recognizes the importance of leisure as a prerequisite for the kind of life he sees as ideal, a life of philosophical contemplation. To him, a life spent consulting the greatest philosophers puts you in the best company possible and teaches you how to live. Only someone who has learned how to live, and lived right, will, at the end of his life, be able to say, "I have lived the life I wanted, and I am ready to die." Instead of cursing all the time he gave to pursuits did not have their origin within him. In Seneca's own words, it is not that we have a short space of time, but that we waste much of it. We have everything we need for an intentional life at our disposal. We just need the courage to reject what keeps us from it. Earlier, we talked about the chief good in Stoic ethics being living in balance with nature. But if this was a person's individual nature or a universal nature was up for debate. I can't help but notice this tension in On the Shortness of Life. In Seneca's day, a universal nature would be one where human beings naturally organize themselves into societies, and each person plays the part that nature ordained for them. Paulinus is here to make sure the grain gets imported without snags. Seneca is here to tutor Nero and serve the state, but fitting into this prescriptive society is not what Seneca is suggesting. In fact, he sees the attempt to conform to society's prescriptions as a rat race that distracts and detracts from a person ever realizing their full personal and philosophical potential. He doesn't come out and say it, but by suggesting that we turn inward, he lays the groundwork for us to start thinking about ourselves as individuals, rather than as a part of the whole. In this sense, his Stoicism is not the grin and bear it ruggedness that we typically think of today, but a philosophy of self-reflection and expression of one's own individual nature. In fact, minus his appeal to the authority of the preceding centuries of classical Greek thought, this is essentially the existentialist argument. A fork has a form and a function because it was designed by humans who needed a tool to perform a specific function. Human beings are not so fortunate. We have form without function, bodies with no discernible purpose beyond satisfying our bodily impulses. Yeah, we have body parts and minds that are optimized to perform certain functions by evolutionary processes, but there is not a purpose, as it were, to our existence. We're not here to be or to do, we just are. Purpose isn't dictated by something external to you, it's subjective and personal. I suspect if the situation were framed this way to Seneca, he would add that if we just are, then we ought to at least be ourselves. I wanted to get my finger on the pulse of subversive attitudes towards work. So I went to the oft-derided source of opinions on this subject, r/AntiWork. I'm not sure why, but I was expecting to find posts by users upset with the psychological or philosophical toll working imposes. How, in a Senecan way, they may feel their time slipping from them, that their time was not their own, and how unfair it is that so much time should be devoted to something so removed from oneself. The indignity of it all. I at least expected some references to Marx. Maybe I thought this would be the tone of the subreddit because of the infamous interview with the moderator, who worked as a dog walker but was hoping to cut back his hours and teach philosophy. If you can't tell by my tone, I did not find what I was looking for. I went onto Reddit in late October of 2023 and sorted by top for the last month. I read through the top 30, saving each in a folder on my computer, and describing each post according to a few characteristics I developed prior to conducting my little observation. The characteristics are not mutually exclusive, but they are an explicit or implicit expression of desire for ataraxia or leisure, feeling unappreciated at work, wanting there to be a feeling of purpose at work, feeling life passing by and/or an encounter with mortality, and financial instability. Of the 30 posts, only 4 expressed any kind of interest in increasing one's leisure time. One that expressed this quite cogently was by a user who said, "I have so many people in my office acting like today is a blessing because of how slow it is. You shouldn't even be working. Am I the only one that wants to break free and go home to enjoy my life? Why is everyone so happy to be here today? What a bunch of chumps." The user is upset that they have to be at work on a holiday and expresses incredulity that their coworkers are fine with being there. I wonder, is this user the black sheep of the office? Or do their coworkers just conceal their resentment better? Maybe chopping it up with their colleagues on a slow day is a better alternative to them than being home with their spouse, their kids, or all by themselves. Maybe these people are workaholics who don't know what to do with time off even when they have it. In Seneca's terminology, they would choose to be mentally preoccupied even when they have the opportunity for leisure. Here's another post where the user talks about the agony of forcing themselves into work each day. "It's the full-time rat race that's killing me. Having every minute accounted for before and after work to get everything I need done. Working out, showering, prepping lunch, cooking a fresh and healthy dinner, getting a decent amount of sleep. Where do I fit in what I want to do?" This post gets us something that Seneca really doesn't. While he does mention avoiding excessive time at a barber or keeping a stable of athletes, the activities eating up this user's time are more seen as borderline necessities today. With a full-time office job where you're sitting down all day, making time for the gym is essential to maintain a healthy body, just as much as cooking healthy meals is. Between sleep and all the time spent offsetting the unhealthiness of office life, the user feels that they have no time to spend on the things they want to do. Add in a commute, and the amount of time left in the budget evaporates into a few hours a day between mental overload and sleep. I do question one element of this equation, though. Are the activities we consider necessities truly necessary? I'm not going to argue about showering, cooking healthy meals, or working out, but I do wonder about the necessity of working a job that deprives someone of the rest of their life. How much money does one really need? Or put another way, how much money are the best years of your life really worth? I think we would find that a person can support themselves, and even a small family, on a lot less than a high-level corporate salary, and would have a lot more time for themselves as compensation. If this user were to cut back to a role with less responsibility, I suspect the Stoics would approve of the career move, and they might find themselves a little better off. I can easily imagine these quotes alongside the hypothetical grievances expressed in On the Shortness of Life, right next to the patrician complaining of how much time is going towards hearing the petitions of his patrons, or Paulinus burning the midnight oil, neglecting his own interests to make sure the grain reports are filled out on time. We may live in different times, but the feeling of our work preoccupying our time has persisted. Still, as I mentioned, posts like this only represented a small fraction of the sample. 0 posts mentioned anything about wanting work to have meaning or be purposeful, and of the 3 posts mentioning life passing by or a brush with death, they are more concerned with management expecting people to keep working after a workplace accident than they were about the author reflecting on their own mortality. In all, only 23% of the posts made any allusion to a philosophical grounding for their distaste for work. Most posts were focused on what could be called more pressing concerns, that is, If you don't consider the fact that you will die one day and you have no idea when that day will be a pressing concern. 16 of the top 30 posts alluded to a feeling of being unappreciated, and 12 posts referred to the author's or people in general's desire for, or lack, of financial stability. So what's going on here? Maybe I got a bad sample. Maybe I misunderstood the point of the subreddit, and it's really just a place to go and vent, making a name like r/work sucks or r/fuck work more appropriate. Do those exist? Maybe it's more likely that older people will reflect and develop the same feelings expressed in On the Shortness of Life than younger people. It's not unreasonable to suspect that the reason so few posts on the subject turned up is because there's not a preponderance of mere retirees posting on Reddit. Maybe it's a class thing? There's definitely an element of worker versus management tension present in the posts about feeling unappreciated. Seneca is not completely silent on class differences and their shared desire for leisure, and though he does characterize the lower classes as more prone to idle preoccupation, he doesn't condemn them to it. What's more, even the pinnacle of Roman society was not immune to resentment when it came to work. Speaking of the divine Augustus, Seneca says, "And so he longed for leisure, in the hope and thought of which he found relief for his labors. This was the prayer of one who was able to grant the prayers of other men." It's not in my ethos to tell other people what to do or how to think. Still, I can't help but feel that there is something missing from the conversation about work that we are having today. The problem as I see it isn't just that bosses suck and we're all underpaid. They're definitely true. It's that we are involuntarily, and in some cases unnecessarily, engaged in work that takes up the majority of our day when it doesn't even need to. When we stare at our computer screens waiting for emails to come in, we're not just losing sunny mornings and chats with our friends. We're losing a connection with ourselves, daily opportunities to connect with our internal desires, our aspirations, and the kind of life we would will for ourselves if we didn't have to be here. What hope do we have to get to know ourselves when every day we burn ourselves out on someone else's problems? The grains of sand continue to fall, whether we're conscious of it or not. We only have so many. In Epictetus's discourses, he differentiates animal natures from human natures. God constituted each of the other animals either to be eaten, or to serve in farming, or to produce cheese, or for some other comparable use. To perform these functions, what need did they have of the power to pay attention to impressions and discriminate between them? But God introduced human beings to be students of himself and his works, and not merely students, but also interpreters of these things. It's wrong, therefore, for us to begin and end where the non-rational animals do. We should rather begin where they do, but end where nature has ended in our case. Nature ended at studying and paying attention to things and a way of life in harmony with itself. See to it, then, that you do not die without having studied these things. I can't help but think of my own situation and the circumstances that led me to where I was. I was chasing a bigger paycheck, I wanted to feel important, and I wanted the esteem of my peers who, when it really came down to it, didn't understand what my job was in the first place and never cared what I did in the second. Still, taking a step back, I can recognize just how incompatible my job was with my nature, although what that nature might be is still unclear to me. Is my nature as Seneca and Epictetus figure to be curious and to learn, maybe study philosophy? Is it in mankind's nature to struggle and just muddle through, as r/anti-work attitudes would suggest? Are we all just giving ourselves something to suffer through unnecessarily? Whenever you talk about something so broad and still so personal as work, the conversation can go on forever, so I will end it here with a final literary consideration. In Nietzsche's Thus Spake Zarathustra, Zarathustra comes down from the mountain to teach new values to the people, who promptly run him out of town. He wanders the wilderness, gains followers, and when he is ready to leave his people, he imparts on them the message of internal value generation. That is to say, reject the external, the abstractions, the thou shalts. Embrace that which comes from you. What do you will for yourself? What ideas mean something to you? I'm curious what that means for all of you. Unless you're exceptionally privileged, you probably have to work for a living. But the human condition, at least in my self-generated value system, is not one of begrudging servitude. To me, to be human is to be vital, curious, enthusiastic, and social. I still have to consider how those qualities will fit into a professional context. Maybe they don't. Either way, we all have to survive somehow. It might as well be fun, or at the very least, mean something to you.